Gonna start right after the Mishnah on Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. Okay. Thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. Because of our learning, we should have Beis Hamikdash immediately. Learning the Nishma, Savigol the Basra Daf, Sanos have been Sian, and our first time of Avin David Ben Sarah, and Gedali gets Elias Ben Prayer. Are we worried about the storm? You're flying, you know.
Supposed to come back on Wednesday, so late last night I changed everything Thursday.
Oh, because there may not be flights tomorrow. On Wednesday, there may not be flights.
Yeah.
Tomorrow also?
Tomorrow's Thursday.
I actually may not be here tomorrow. I have to ask Dr. Stein if he wants to take over. Dr. Stein, you here?
No, I'm not here. I'm not here.
You would love to.
Shmuley, you're on. Can you handle it? It's a lot of work. Okay. Let's just go over in the Mishnah what we learned, and then we can continue the Gemara. The Mishnah says that if someone says, I'm going to sell you a piece of land exactly that I measured with a rope, then that's what he's supposed to give him. If it's any more or less, then it has to be returned. If he says, Hein chaser, hein yater, if he says more or less, I'm measuring you, I'm giving you a base score. So then there's a range over here of what's considered a good sale and what's considered too much. So if it's less than a reiva lasa, which is a reiva, is a reiva hakav, a quarter of a kav. And there are 6 kav in a sa, so it's 1/24th, a quarter of a sixth. It's 1/24th of a sa. Then we say it's forgiven. If it's less than that, it's forgiven. If it's more than that, then you have to make a calculation of how much more. And the way we do it is like this: we gave a advantage to the seller that the buyer has to buy the excess land. We don't want the seller to be left with a nothing piece of land that he ends up with. We force the seller to buy the extra. Maybe he doesn't have money. I don't know. He stand in line. He's got to pay him, but wait, you give it to collections. But watch out over here. It's a little wet. Come sit over here. So that would be if it's more than a reiva. Okay. Then we mentioned that if it's going to be Tisha Kabin, it's going to be reach the level of 9 kav, then he automatically returns the field. How much is a reiva per saw for 30 saw? We're talking about a base core. So a base core, 30 saw, is going to have in it 30 reivas. Well, it's going to have in it we're going to have to each saw, we're going to have 1 reiva kav that's allowed to be extra, up to a reiva that could be extra. So if I have 30 quarters, I have 7.5, right? 4 times 7 would be 28. I would have 7 and 2, right? I would 7 whole, right? If you make it into, what's it called when you make the fractions? What's it called when you do that? No, when you reduce it, it's reduce it now. You reduce it from 7 from 30 quarters. I now have 7 whole numbers, 7 and 1/2. Okay, so I have 7.5. But if it would reach 7.5 is what's a bit beneath 7.5 is acceptable to be passed on as a valid sale. and it's considered mechila because he said, I'm selling you hein chaser, hein yaser, approximately. So under that, that was acceptable. It's 1/24th off. Under 1/24th is acceptable. If it's more than that, but under 9 kav, so then we consider that you have to buy the extra land. And if it's more than 9 kav, then that can already be given back to the meicher as a full field, because 9 kav is already a full field. Our whole concern with the meicher was that he was going to be left with a field that's useless, because it's going to give him a sliver of the land that has no use for him. But now he has 9 kav, he has a full field, so that's good. We can give it that. Okay, now the Gemara says Iboilahum. Where's the question? In the Mishnah, we're on the bottom, second to the bottom line. Gimel on the base. In the Mishnah, we made a distinction between if he says Mida Bechevel or if he says Hein Chaser, Hein Yaser. Mida Bechevel means I'm measuring it with the rope. Yeah. And if he says Hein Chaser, Hein Yater, then he says approximately. Let's say he doesn't say either of those. Let's say he just says base score. So what does he mean by base score? Does he mean exact or does he mean approximately? Base score stama mai. What happens then? Okay. The Gemara is going to bring a proof from our Mishnah. It says, Tashemasa, come and listen. Base core afani maichalach mida bechevel. If I'm selling you a base core that I measured with the rope, it means it's going to be a precise base core, 30 sa. That's what I'm selling you. Pichis kalshu, the Mishnah goes on and says that if he is a little bit less, then yanaka, then you have to take off from the price. Yaser kalshu, if it's a little bit more than yaser, then you have to give it back or you have to pay the extra money. Hastam, but let's say he didn't say anything. He didn't say mida bechevel. Oh. I think that would be factored in because we said that you're supposed to measure the same for the sellers, for the broker is supposed to measure in the winter the same. In the winter, the string gets longer or shorter? The telephone wires? Yeah. The telephone wires, they get longer in the summer. They sag in the summer. Okay. So we're supposed to measure it in the same season, and I guess you would have to factor in that difference. I don't know. There's a calculation somewhere of what the difference would be, but okay. So hastama. But if you didn't say mida bechevel, then it would be approximately, right? Why do you subtract and add? Because he said he's selling it exactly. But if not, we imply from this that hastama, but if it would be plain without any adding in the words that it's doing it precise with measuring with the rope, then kehein chaser vehein yasedami. That would be like he said approximately. Okay, sounds good so far. Let's say maseifa. Let's go further. Let's read further in the Mishnah. And if he says that approximately a little more, a little less, then even if it's a quarter, if he adds up to a quarter of to each saw, which means 1/24th, a quarter of a kav to each saw. It's not a quarter; it's a quarter of a kav per saw. It's 1/24th. Then it's considered a valid sale. Stama. But if it wouldn't be like that, then kamid bechevel dami. If he wouldn't say hein chas hein yaser, then that would be like as if he said it's going to be precise. So the Gemara says, okay, obviously from here we can't get any proof. Now, the Rashbam points out, based on the following Mishnah that we didn't learn yet, that our Mishnah has its own chiddush. We have another Mishnah coming up at the end of the next Amud. Mida bechevel ani meichalach hein chaser hein yaser. Bittel hein chaser hein yaser mida bechevel. If you have both expressions that are contradictory, so the second expression overrides the first expression. So what we needed to do first was we needed to set up the two expressions, because we wanted to tell me the next mission that's going to teach me which one overrides the other one, which it's called Taifas Lashon Achron. You grab the second expression. All right, a big sugya about this in Bab Metzia with 12 coins per 12 coins per year, 1 coin per month. And it turned out that it was a leap year.
Yeah.
So which one was it? So you take the last expression, 1 coin per month, which means 13. That was like the discussion. Anyway, over here, the Mishnah is going to tell us that you take the last expression, the one that comes second, overrides the first one. But what we had here, what the Gemara did, was what's called diyukim seisrim, contradictory implications. When you looked at the first part of the Mishnah, what it told me was, what it implied was that if you don't say exactly, then it means approximately. When we looked at the second part of the Mishnah, if you don't say approximately, then it means exactly. So, that's a contradiction, because if I don't say anything exactly or approximately, then from the Reisha of the Mishnah, it teaches me that I meant approximately. And from the Seif of the Mishnah, it taught me that I meant exactly. So it's okay. So obviously, this is not. You can't imply anything from this here. So what's the point of this Mishnah if I can't get an implication from it? The point of this Mishnah is a setup for the next Mishnah that's coming, that's going to teach me that I'm going to use the second expression to override the first expression. Okay, so now we need another source to get the answer. When it says Ibaylahu, just the yeshiva had a question. The students in the Talmudic times in Pampadisa and Nardai, wherever they were learning Surah was longer than Nardai. Nardai didn't last long.
Didn't it say on the previous Daf you could sell it K base core?
Yeah.
So this is saying you can say K base core, or you can say nothing, and that can be implied. Is that what it's saying?
Well, what the Gemara's question wasn't Kibbeh square. That's going to come up actually in a moment.
Oh, okay.
The next piece is going to discuss the Kibbeh score. But we were ignoring the Kibbeh score issue. We were just doing, if you just say base score, what do you mean? Do you mean exactly, or do you mean approximately? Okay. You see, this is a big question. If you talk to someone, I'll see you at 9 o'clock. It depends if it's a Yeki or if it's a Hasidic guy. South Americans, I think, are also like that. It's like 9 o'clock means like 11:30. Okay. Tashma, so come and listen. Base korafar ani meichalach. I'm selling you a base score. Ki base korafar ani meichalach. Or he says, I'm selling you like a base score. Or hein chaser hein yaser ani meichalach. Or if he says approximately a base score. What's the din by all three cases? That all of it is approximately. If you have up to 1/24 that you can add or subtract, and it's still considered a valid sale. We see that you don't need to say approximately to make it approximately. As long as you don't say that it's precise, then it's automatically approximate. That's what we see from this brisa. Alma stama nami kein chasein yasadami. That if you don't say that it's precise, then it means approximately. The Gemara says, nope, you didn't read it right. That's not what the brisa meant. The brisa meant was hasam prushika mafarish. Over there, the brisa is explaining itself. Ezu base core shehika base core. When would I say that if he says a base chord, he really means like a base chord, but not exactly a base chord? That's if he adds in the expression approximately. So with a little punctuation here, with a few little, prefixes and suffixes that we add in, we have a totally different sentence.
In most cases, it's exact.
But now we have it's always exact until you say approximately. It's just exactly the opposite. Okay. That seems what we're holding. Maskif la Ravashi. Ravashi has a question on the way we just interpreted this this brisa. It says Im Kain. If that's the case, if you want to reinterpret the brisa like this by adjusting the punctuation and some prefixes, you throw them in. Im Kain ani meichalach lamli. So why did it say for each case ani meichalach I am selling to you? Should have just said exactly what we want to adjust, which was we could have said like this: base core afar, ki base core afar, hein chaser ein yaser ani meichalach. You leave out all the ani meichalachs. I am selling to you. I am selling to you wasn't part of the discussion. When you say I am selling to you, that means that each one of these is going to divide it into a separate case. Oh, very nice. Okay. Are you the D on the Zoom? Is that you? Zoom? You were the D. I saw a D on there. David Rodriguez here. So because of Ravashi's question, the term maskif is always used when we're asking a logical question, not a contradiction, a logical question, a strong logical question. It's maskif. So because of that, Elav Shmaminas. Yeah, it is an attack, but it's it's used from logic, not from quoting another source. No. So, we see from this, when someone, so if we can't interpret it now to be explaining itself, so then now the way we have to interpret it is that it's telling me that each of these cases have the same rule. That means if he says I'm selling you exact, it doesn't say the word exact. It says I'm selling you a base core, I'm selling you like a base core, or I'm selling you approximately a base core. All of them have the rule of approximately. Until he says exact, then it means approximate. Do you hear this? A little surprising that this is the conclusion. Wasn't expecting it to end up like this. Yeah. Okay.
Usually things are more precise.
Yeah. Business, I would assume. Well, okay.
I would think that the seller would always underball whatever's being sold. He would always
Make sure he's winning.
yeah, he would always
No, but most
give
sellers are
maybe like a
nice.
sixth below selling price, as long as it's within.
So here it's a 124.
124.
So it's not in the sixth range. It's much less than that.
124th is when it says approximate.
And now, even without saying approximate, it's 124th anyway. It's only if he says precise that he doesn't have the 124th.
What's
Yeah.
the logic? Is that because it's an expression? Oh, I'll sell you my base core, like
Yeah, I think what the
I'll
Gemara
sell
is
you my
doing,
field, like
sort of like Nedarim, where you follow the way people talk. And that's what people mean when they say base core. They mean
About
that's how they talk about it.
not nickel and diming it. Just like,
Right.
So does this mean we're done with the analogy to the Mishnah and Arkin about hektish? Because usually that's always resolved in a way that's advantageous to the.
Yeah, but I think even over there, that would also go after Lashon Bnei Adam, I think. I think
Yeah.
that would follow language.
Hmm.
like even if the measurement is off, it's good.
Up to 124th, it would be a valid sale. Yeah. Now, Hill is pointing out that when it came to, 1 second, I have to clarify. Hill is pointing out that means that with the measurement being off, the sale is still good, but that's only by land, not by metalton, not by personality. By personality, if you're off even one iota, sale is invalid. Now, when it comes to land, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't have land has two differences. One of them is if you're overcharged for a piece of land, the sale is valid, or undercharged, the sale is valid. However, by personalty, sale would be invalid if it's over a sixth, right? There's another difference when it comes to land, is that if the measurement isn't precise, it could be a little bit estimated, and it's still considered a valid sale. And where I got this from, the Rashbam, on right after the Mishnah, back on the page before. On Gimel on the base, if you look at the second Rashbam, he says, that even though Rava said 10 pages ago, that if the measurements are not accurate, even if it's less than the sixth, it's going to be this whole sale is invalid because you didn't measure it right. That's only by personalty. The rabbis assume that a person would rather take whatever there is rather than to invalidate the sale when it comes to property, if it's not exact. People just want to have land. They want to buy land. You want to have it. It's not off. If it's not exact, whatever, we'll work out the price. But I want the land.
I thought 1/6 did apply to person.
1/6 applies to personalty if it's a mistake in the pricing of it, but a mistake in the measuring of it, even less than 1/6.
Does that refer even to small?
Have to be exact.
It's not that it doesn't. It means that if you're off, you still want the deal to go
Up to
through.
1/24, it's still valid. The sale is still valid. 1/24 of the property, of the full sale. We're going to see it's going to be a machlekes on the bottom. Rav Huna and Rav Nachman. There may be a difference about that. We'll see soon. 1 in 24.
Okay. Now
Sorry, Rav Naftali.
I'm just thinking things have changed in life, I guess, because today we're very precise about land measurement. Maybe it's because we can be, because we have modern surveyor equipment, etc. But, it comes back, I think, maybe to the beginning of this. We're talking about a base core, which is a huge area.
Yeah.
And it's like you're saying, I'm buying this valley. That's so precise. But you certainly, I don't think you'd say this if you're buying the land the size of a courtyard.
Right, that could be. It could be. Let's take a look at the end of this Gemara. At the end of this Amud, we're going to have an interesting machlekes, Rav Huna and Rav Nachman and me. Adjust some things a little bit.
Your name is?
Sorry. Let's see over here. That's what we're holding, right? If the sale was an approximate sale, and he went over the 1/24th, so then he has to return. He has to return money, which means it is talking about if the buyer ended up with more property than what the seller said, and it turns out that it's more than 1/24th, then he has to pay for it. What does he return to him? Money. He's not returning money. It's a funny expression. He means pay money. So the Gemara explains, actually, the Gemara is like introducing a question. You only care about the benefit of the seller, but not the benefit of the buyer. Now, what we mean over here is that the seller sold the property. In that property was a little bit too much, more than what the measurements were. So the buyer could say, okay, you know what, there's a little sliver over there of land that I didn't buy, and okay, I'm giving it back to you. Now, the seller can hardly reach that property, that piece of land, because he has to walk through the buyer's property to get there. And when he gets there, there's nothing he can really do with it because it's so small. What are you going to do? What are you going to do over there that's going to be worthwhile? There's not. It's a piece of land it's a sliver of land. So in order to benefit the seller, we tell the buyer that we force him to buy that extra land. Now, that's a benefit to the seller. The seller gets the money on something that he wasn't able to do anything with. So we care about the seller here. And we're saying you only care about the seller, you don't care about the buyer. Let's go further. Tanya, it was taught in the Brisa. Piches shiva kavanu mechza lakor, or he shiva kavanu mechza lakor, higiyai. If it's, let me just explain the measurements here is that a core is 30 sa. Each saw is 144 eggs. And a kav is 24 eggs. So there's 6 kav in a sa. So if you have a quarter of a kav per sa, you're going to end up with 7.5 kav per core. So what we're saying over here is that quarter of a kav, which turns out to be a 1/24th of a sa, is instead of doing the quarter kav thing, it gave me the full measurement of how much a quarter of a kav would add up to. So it says if it's 7.5 kav to a core, if the property was less 7.5 kav per core, or more 7.5 kav per core, the sale is valid. But if it's more than that, well, now we're forcing the
So that's the claim that has
right. We're forcing the
seller.
seller to sell him, and we're forcing the purchaser to buy. But it seems like we're going both ways here. That what does it mean to force the seller to sell? That means only if the purchaser wants it, only if the buyer wants it. But just like we could force the buyer, we can also force the seller to sell. Right? So it means that we go for both. It's not just an institution for a seller. We're seeing from this that the sages cared about an institution for the buyer as well. It says you force the seller to sell if it was less than that. Let me just see, just 1 second. Why would we force the seller to sell? We're talking about a piece of land that the seller isn't interested in having. I'm sorry, the buyer isn't interested in having the seller going through his property to get to his land, just for that little piece of land. He's not interested in that. So if that's the case, then we would force the seller to sell that little piece of land that was really supposed to go to the buyer. Okay. So we see that we care about the buyer as well. The Gemara answers, Hassam kigoin dahavi yakira mi karav azal hashta. In order to explain this, the Gemara adjusts, it factors in one more thing into this equation of what's going on here. And we're saying that originally the price of the property was higher, and now the price dropped of the property. So Damrinan later, we say to him like this, obviously, if you want to give me more land, so Havli Kazuza Dahashta, then I want to buy it the way it is now, which is the price just dropped, the lower price. Because we can't do two things bad. We can't, if we're gonna have the buyer buy the land, we can't force on him the price as well. We can't force on him, but even though he would agree to the rest of the land for that price, but now that you're adding on another piece to the property, so you can't force him to buy something at a higher price that right now that's not the price. So then we're going to say we force the seller to sell at the lower price, even though we're not forcing him to sell it. If he wants, he could just give him the money, or leave it as is. What are we talking about over here? So they're saying that he gave him a property that's less than it's 1/24th less. So and they made the price for that. And now there's a little piece more that will finish off this, that will be the end of the property, I guess till the border somewhere. And that little piece, he has to sell him at the lower price, or he doesn't have to buy it, or he could just leave it. Yeah. So that would be forcing him to sell. What we mean forcing is forcing him to sell at today's price.
This is all because the size.
Yeah, because the size was approximate. Yeah. And he ended up with less than what he understood he was getting.
Then it
Right.
should have been the original.
Right. Okay. The Gemara says, 1 second. But we have another brisa that says the opposite. That when he pays for the property, he doesn't pay for the current price, he pays for the original price. It says Hassam could going to have Izolami Karav, Yikra. Over there, the case was exactly the opposite. Over there, when you're forcing him to pay the original price of the field was lower, and now the price went up. And he's saying, look, I only agreed to this because of the price was good. Now you're forcing me to buy more, even though the price has changed, but you can't force me to buy it when the price isn't good. Right? The whole reason why I got into this was because the price. So when the price changes, then the purchaser is the one that's going to win. He's going to get the lower price. But when it's going to come to the piece of land, the seller's going to win. And the seller's going to be able to get rid of the land. And the purchaser is going to have to buy it if the price stays the same. If the price changes, then the purchaser wins what price he's going to pay. Okay. Safe check. Now it says we're holding now Shir Besada base test cabin. We gave a limit. We gave a limit to when we say that the seller, to when we say that the buyer should be buying this extra little piece of property. So that's only if it's under 9 kav. In between, if it's under 7.5 kav per core, which is 1/24th, then we say that the sale is valid and it is what it is. If it's more than that, then we say that we have to make a calculation and someone has to buy it or give back money, right? If it's more than 9 kav, then we say that it's a separate field, and the seller keeps that property. Seller keeps that property. We don't force the buyer to buy it. Because it's a full property. It's already 9 kav, is already a full property. Now, there was a difference here between if it was a field, then it was 9 kav. If it was a garden, then it was a chatzi kav, or according to Rabbi Akiva, a quarter kav. Those are different measurements of what's considered a significant area. The Gemara now says, Amar Rav Huna, Teskam and Shamru, Rav Huna says, when we said 9 kav, afilu bebika gedayla, even if it's in a very large area. So let's say there's an area that has, the Rashbam gives the example, 10 core. Instead of 30, that's 300 saw. Yeah. 300 saw. Now, in 30 saw, a quarter kav per saw would give me 7.5 kav. That's what we said. Once it reaches 9, a little bit more than that, then we say, oh, that's already a significant field, and the seller keeps that. Comes along Rav Huna and says, even if he sold them 300 saw, then once it reaches 9 kav there, not talking about a quarter per saw, way less than that, a tenth of that. once it reaches 9 kav, automatically the halacha changes, and we tell the seller that no, you have a piece of land here that's going to be yours, because that's already a significant piece of land. So in other words, we're not looking at the ratio of what's imprecise. We're looking at the absolute amount of property that there is, and once it reaches 9 kav, then that goes to the seller. If it was over, if he gave him too much, once it reaches 9 kav, it goes to the seller. That's Rav Huna's view. Rav Nachman says no. Rav Nachman Amar leisen shiva kav and mechzel l'chol kor v'kor. No, we do a quarter, which is 1/24 per core is allowed to be off. Proportionate. Everything is proportionate. Yeah, but there are totally different ways of looking at this. And if there's anything more than 9 kav, then it would go back. Talking about per core. Okay. The Rashbam, if you notice this, the page of the Gemara here in the traditional Gemara, there's no Taisvus, but the Rashbam spends a lot of time going through other opinions that he rejects, and it's very difficult to read. The Rashbam is very easy to read, but when he's arguing against other people, it's very complicated. So I have one that he doesn't. He says this pshat I don't like. This pshat I don't like. Okay. I was telling my wife the other day how the Rashbam was explaining the graves. We did that Gemara over this, over Shoshana, the graves. It was unbelievable how he was able to describe the layout, even without the diagram. I mean, there's a diagram here, but even without the diagram, he was able to spell it out. Like, if you walk in, there's going to be this on the right, and it's like really descriptive to describe a room, like trying to describe a spiral staircase without using your hands. The Rashbam could do it. Okay. Esvei Rav Nachman. Rav asked Rav Nachman a question. Rav Nachman was the one that says that it's all proportionate. It says Shemshir Basada based Tishakabin, that if there's left in the field, if there's an excess of 9 kav, so then it goes to the seller, right? Lav dezavan lekarayim, and it doesn't tell us how much he sold him. Even if he sold him two core. 2 core would give me 15. If it would be 1/24, then it would give me 15 kav, according to Rav Huna. No, not according to Rav Nachman, it would give me 15. According to Rav Huna, it's always 9, right? Rav Huna is absolute. According to Rav Nachman, it's proportionate. So really, it should be 15. And you're telling me that it's only 9, and you sold me 2 core. 2 core is 60. 60 saw. So it should have doubled the amount, and instead you left it at the absolute number of 9. So the Gemara says, that wasn't the case. The case was talking about that he only sold him a core. We're going to go through a few of these questions where we're going to have like an assumption, and we're ready to say, well, that's an assumption, that's not accurate. Ubegina, and if it's a garden, base chatzikav, lavan dezavan lasasayim, isn't it? We talking about that he sold him a whole saw, and there was excess, was a half a kav, which is the absolute and not the proportion. Just like dezavan saw, he only sold him 1 saw, which is the measurement of the gina. If it's 1 saw, then it would be a half a kav. Rabbi Kiva base reiva, and according to Rabbi Kiva, it's a quarter. My love, dezavan saw, probably sold him a whole saw. It says like dezavan chatzi saw. It was a quarter to the half a saw, which that would be that ratio. Okay. Ravashi has a question. Sada v'nasis gina v'nasis sada mai. Here, there's one. What happens is there's a difference between if he's selling him a field or if he's selling him a garden. a garden could be much smaller and still is considered a significant area. What's the difference of a field and a garden? The amount of water that there is there. A garden needs much more water. So if somehow a new spring came up and there was the water coming into this, and it was now you could use it as a garden. So then he sold it to him as a field, but it turned into a garden, and now he wants it wasn't, the field was approximately, he sold it, but for a garden that would be too much for the field. That was fine, that approximation. So does it switch? It says teku. We don't have an answer to that. Tana was taught in a brisa. It's a very interesting brisa. What we were doing here was we were trying to benefit the seller by taking the property off his hands because he has nothing to do with such a small property. But that won't be a benefit to him if he himself had to own the field on the other side, adjacent to that little piece of property, and we can say, no, you can keep that property, it's fine. So the Brisa tells us, it spells it out, that if he has a field on the other side that's next to this excess land, we don't force the seller to buy it. We don't force the buyer to buy it. We can leave it with the seller. Ravashi comes in and it says, let's say it's adjacent to it, but there's a pit in between. Will that separate, and will the halacha change over there? What about if it's a stream of water? Will that separate between his field? Let's say there's a street that's going through. Will that separate between this little sliver of property and his property? Let's say there's a row of palm trees there. Teku. We leave. In other words, there's no one else that owns anything. There's no private individual that owns anything, but it doesn't mean that you can plow it all together. What would be the halacha then? Will we say that it's considered part of his land or not? Do we say that the buyer is going to be forced to buy it? Now there's a problem over here. When the Mishnah finished off, what the Mishnah wanted to say was when the sale, the approximation was too off, and you have to return the excess. You don't only return the excess over what was acceptable, but you go back and you return the excess of everything. We make it precise, right? So what I wanted to say is not only the excess do you return, but even the quarter kav that you started with, you also return, even though that was forgiven, if it would be under that, because it was approximation. So, but once you have to return it, you return everything. So, but it didn't write it. It said, not only the quarter do you return, but you even return the excess. The Gemara says, Klapilaya. He said it backwards. Tani Ravin bar Rav Nachman, he taught it the other way, where you say it, not only the excess do you return, but even the quarter calves that were forgiven, you also now go back and you return that as well. Okay, leave it over here. Have a good day, everyone.